Hey, welcome to the Do Good Work podcast. Today we're talking to Hilary Swan. Hilary is the founder of Rebel Scout Consulting. And after starting her career in inside sales, Hilary worked her way up the competitive world of global sales to recently running an $18 million sales team across three different divisions. And having always wanted to start something on her own, she began looking into startup sales, only to realize that there's a huge accessibility gap from founder led sales to the VP of sales hire. So, to fill that need in the marketplace, Hillary founded Rebel Scout Consulting to give startups and small businesses access to fractional sales leadership as they grow. And she is on a mission to give entrepreneurs the edge to succeed. Well, Hillary, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Hillary, I love having these conversations to learn more about how people took their entrepreneurial jump or pivot or shift. Specifically now with I don't know, this is more empirical, but with a higher trend of going fractional, adding value, companies need significant, a huge need, but in a fractional way. Kind of want to get to know more about your story, why you took the jump, and then how you're seeing the playing field from a different lens, being able to work with a number of teams versus just one in-house.
Yeah, let's hop in.
Let's jump in. Tell me a little bit more about your background and looking out the window and wanting to be fractional or jump into an entrepreneurial role. What was that like?
So, my background really sits in corporate America. I worked my way up, but I've always wanted to do something on my own.
Hmm,
But as my career grew, felt like the gap was becoming greater in terms
hmm,
of being able to step outside of that and do something.
interesting.
And somebody within my network had recently acquired a company, and the day that they acquired the company, their sales leader had left.
Hmm,
Being close in my network, they had reached out around not being sure what to do. They weren't expecting to take over a company only to have their sales leader leave and have the 8 salespeople essentially left with no leader. And then he's now running this company with no sales leader. So behind the scenes, I was helping, and he had asked and encouraged that I look into, "Oh, would you wanna be a VP of sales for a startup?" And I feel, "Oh, maybe I should start looking into that. Maybe that'll be, like, my sidestep out of a more corporate setting into the startup world," because
mhm.
we all glamorize the startup world when we're not in it.
Yeah, until you're in it and you're like, oh,
Oh, okay, yeah. It's a little different. So, I started doing some research into what that looked like, and really quickly I realized that's not what I wanted to do.
hmm,
And I came across the fractional model. So, this is not my original thought. This is done across many different specialties. But I found in doing some research and speaking with founders and CEOs and owners of companies that the fractional sales leadership model is really underutilized.
hmm.
And I wanted to see, is there a play for me to do this? Not only from a skill set, but is there a need? And there is a need. And so what I decided is spring of 2022, I left my comfortable corporate job to hop in and launch Rebel Scout Consulting, which is fractional sales leadership. So we help close the gap from founder led sales all the way up to the first VP of sales hire,
Wow.
or even prior to that, where reps are hired. Sales is so important to the success of a company, but sales and sales leadership is not something that a founder typically has any experience in. Oh, this is where we come in to say it doesn't need to be a full-time situation. It doesn't need to be forfeiting equity or a two, three, $400,000 a year salary. The impact can be done at a fractional engagement.
Yeah, and I think we'll dive into the mindset around fractional and how that is almost like an asymmetrical reward risk. Like the risk is a low fee or a low whatever it is,
Yeah.
but with
Yeah.
a high return because you're getting a key role taken care of, and either it's a short term or it could be a long term engagement. I've seen that and done that in the past. But I want to highlight what you mentioned is that you were growing your career. The more that you grew, you're like, hey, the gap feels like it's wider, but in
Yeah.
reality, isn't the gap smaller because you have so many skill sets, you have so much experience under your belt, and it can feel like it's wider, but in my opinion, I feel like you were positioned so well because you already had the right skills, the right lens of viewing things, the right leadership models to support smaller businesses.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I went being on the other side, it felt that the gap was so wide, but now that I've hopped over the fence here, I realize the timing wasn't right. I
Hmm,
needed to grow professionally, and I needed to have the good and the challenging experiences to really be able to take everything that I've learned and grown to be to actually transfer that over into not only a founder, but also being the principal consultant for Rebel Scout Consulting. So, yeah, it's so clear now that I'm on the other side of it. But yeah, at the time, that's what it was feeling like.
there might be some listeners right now who are actually considering that and they have a skill set. Maybe they don't know that they have the skill set. I think as a small story or analogy, that usually when someone highlights an awareness within us, like, hey, you actually have something that is valuable. We don't recognize that ourselves, but we can be that for other people. So I'd love for you to kind of be that for our audience right now. What were the skill sets because you said timing, what were the key, I don't know, one, two, or three pieces of skill or learning or maturity in terms of business maturity that like, that you're like, wow, I'm really glad that I got that experience to do what I do now because without it, I may not be the best leader that I can be today. What were those transformations? Because you were leveraging essentially your corporate job to gain those skill
Yeah.
sets.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a really good point. Your original, what you just said around having almost an outsider looking in to tell you, you sometimes need somebody to bring that clarity. And I think what was helpful for me is that I fortunately had somebody in my life to bring that clarity. But if you are on the other side, and this is something that you're considering, what I would say is step one, start having conversations because everybody in that I've interacted with in the world of startups and founders and owners and entrepreneurs, we're all on the same team and it is such a warm welcome into the community.
Mhm,
So you don't know how one conversation could literally make something very clear for you to take that leap. But back to what you were asking from a maturity standpoint, that really has pushed me over the edge is the confidence piece.
hmm,
So being in corporate America and growing and working my way up, I was gaining confidence because as you're being promoted and earning those promotions, it's obviously validates what you're doing.
mhm,
But being able to step outside of that validation and realize that you're doing something on your own, it really took me getting to the point to say, I'm confident in enough in my skill set and in myself that I can bring and add value
mhm.
to other people's businesses. And I can confidently tell you 24 months ago, I was not there.
Oh, wow.
So it really it came full circle, and so that is something going through the experience of kind of the ups and the downs of not having that confidence to say, "I can do this." Another thing would be all of the examples of that were both good and bad that
Hmm,
I experienced, that I was on not only the receiving end, but I saw happening. So in doing this, there's this leadership piece. Not
yeah.
only like a leader of the clients that I interact with, but like the leadership of self.
Hmm.
And there is such a difference between being a leader of people and being a manager.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a real shift where I actually had two people that mentored and really drove into me around being a leader of people, and ironically, they were not at all, but I'm forever appreciative for them to make that so clear to me because
Mhm.
it really impacts how I interact with my clients,
Yeah.
because I think that really fosters, like, a safe learning environment that we're on the same team and we're here to accomplish the same goals.
Yeah.
And you come at that from a management standpoint,
Yeah, it gets
it
annoying,
sucks.
sticky, yeah.
Yeah, no one likes that. So
Especially when you say learning, it's like that's a failure environment too. You gotta learn from failures, and if it's a
totally.
management piece, like, "Oh, I don't wanna fail." But in a leadership piece, yeah, try something, and if it fails, let's learn from it.
You learn
Obviously, within
totally.
boundary, we can't explode the
Yeah,
shop.
absolutely. Yeah, so those I would say are the couple of the highlights that really helped the shift.
I love that. So just to recap, because this is the nuanced things that we can do every day anyways. Communicate or network with a ton of people. Like I even have that right now in my 80/20 planner network. It's on the top. Just talk
Love
to
it.
people. But
Yeah.
the second piece, and this one's pretty interesting, is the confidence itself. Because you had a solid track record. You have a solid track record. And it's interesting to know that that wasn't leaning into your confidence. Do you keep like a wins journal, or do you recommend people to keep like their wins logged down so that if they don't have confidence in themselves, they can look back to it and say, hey, I actually am capable. Look at my track record.
I love that, and you know what? I think I might start a journal because it's funny you say that. Something that I did with my team before my most recent team before I left to start Rebel Scout Consulting was exactly that. Like, we celebrated the little wins and the big wins because especially when you look at sales or sales leadership, we celebrate the wins that are dragged across the line.
Mhm.
And there's so many things along the way that need to be celebrated when you move the needle.
The right
Um,
behaviors. Yeah.
yeah, and reinforcing that from a leadership standpoint, but as we're talking about leading self, I do need to start writing those things down, and I think the listener should do the same because on the days that are hard or the hours that are hard, it's just a good gut check. This is right, and this is legit, and it might not feel great right now. There's so many amazing things that have come of it.
No, 100%. And the last piece that you mentioned that I think is probably one of the most important, and you're probably like bearing the fruits of it right now with your clients, is the difference between the management and leading people. Like leading yourself first and showing up to the best that you can, but also fostering that environment, specifically in a digital world. Like right now, we're remote. So literally, I have my AirPods in, you're in my head. We're communicating or slacking or emailing or whatever you're using for communication. So I'm downloading communication, but also have an individual in my brain talking to me. And then I also have the work that I need to do. So that kind of can get, if the environment isn't safe or clean or positive, like it can get very difficult and not a great experience to work with. And I think that's the biggest difference when you're working with people and leading them to success.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. We are so digital these days. And when you think about the role of a fractional engagement or a fractional interaction, you're only speaking with these people potentially once a week or potentially every single day. But really being able to foster that relationship,
Mhm.
they have a choice to interact with you. They
Yeah.
have a choice to make the engagement successful.
Yeah.
And if the team on the other end of this is not engaged or feeling like since this is a fractional engagement, you don't have skin in the game, that shows. And so I'm hyper conscious to have genuine interactions and really create on day one a very healthy and safe environment. And also meet and learn the people. What makes them tick?
Yeah.
That's the whole idea of the leadership because an hour of unproductive interaction is not gonna move the needle, and
Oh, yeah.
people feel that on the other end of that call, and so I am hyper aware of it, and fortunately, because I am so aware of it, I have been really fortunate in having people engaged and being able to
Produce
grow
result.
and
Yeah.
yeah, but it's a choice. It is they do not have to interact with you the way that you want them to, and sometimes it doesn't start off because 'cause you're essentially a contractor, you're not part of the team necessarily, but I am, and I want to be, and I wanna earn that for them.
That's key, and then the fact that you're doing that's like planting the seeds early to be able to yield, like the crops, etcetera. But even the fact that you focus on that in the beginning is, in my opinion, important, and you mentioned, like, the wasted hour. I was doing some research, and Bloomberg reported that on average, and this is for average salaries, companies waste $25,000 a year per employee for non-efficient time being spent on meetings or community. That's
Wild.
average. Assume
Yeah,
that if your team's 10 people, multiply that by 10, and that's again looking at an average
exactly.
salary.
Yeah.
So there is the pros and the cons. Investing here so that like the micro investments of intentional communication, intentional engagement to yield the behaviors to get the right results. That's essentially what we're doing compounded over time equals the revenue, the driving of sales, but then also the cost savings of no fluff because small businesses can't afford the fluff.
No, they
Yeah.
can't. They can't afford it, and that's a really, really interesting statistic. I believe it too.
Yeah. Let's flip it on the other side because you mentioned that you primarily focus with founder-led sales and or like the person like the example that you gave, someone who bought a business and the VP of sales left. That's scary. Now you have to be both hats, the founder and business owner and VP of sales. Tell me how you make that transition because I normally what I see from my perspective in digital services is that the founder can be the best salesperson. It's very difficult to remove the founder because they're a domain expert. They know how to sell. It's like the back of their hand, but it's not scalable. And it sounds like you're working with a similar situation, founder-led sales who may not be the best at what they're selling and need to be able to scale that or systemize that so they can continue to grow with sales managers, a VP of sales, and then the reps. Tell me about how that transition works because it's a really good puzzle piece to solve.
Yeah, it's great that you're bringing this up because I almost right now am exclusive. Almost all of my engagements are exactly that.
Mm,
And so what I have run into is because the founder of all the things you just said, they are the expert and they hold the credibility. But what the missing link, and you mentioned it, is it's not scalable or sustainable.
mhm,
And so how do you slowly pry that from their hand to free them up to be able to do all the things that they need to be doing? And that
mhm,
is it's a really delicate tango, I guess you could say, for a couple of reasons. First off, being able to actually put into words a sales process. So, because they are the expert at their creation, putting metrics into place to be able to train or explain or scale to bring in reps to do the same thing, it is very challenging and it takes more time than I initially realized for them
mm,
to be able to articulate how they do what they do because there really isn't a method to the madness.
yeah,
Their credibility really trumps any type of sales process. And so, what I have done is I am a strong believer in solution selling.
mhm,
And so, really making it clear to identify a problem that your product or company solves, but being able to articulate via a series of questions to unveil the problem to the client, potential customer, and then be able to present your product or service as a solution. And so traditionally training the founder from a sales perspective has helped us actually put things into play to then bring on sales reps because
mhm.
there's no sense in bringing and paying the overhead of having a rep come in to tell
Without a
them
process or without
all this thing.
yes, I've
And
seen that
so
before.
yeah, it's almost like reverse engineering with the founder. Like you've had success. How do we daisy chain that together? But then equally, let me crash course you through what an actual sales process is so that we can put some actions into each stage so that you can start slowly taking steps back and let's start building a sales team.
You make it sound so simple. In actuality, it totally is not. But no, but it makes a lot of logical sense. But like right now, yeah, it's not. It's definitely a process and it's definitely effort, and that's why I see why they bring you in. But I think one of the things that you mentioned was that the founder does have that unconscious competence, right? So you have to dissect by, I don't know why I know that this works. I just know it.
Yeah.
And from the what is it, the 5 stages of learning or 5 stages of mastery to the point where they're at that point, and
Mhm.
essentially you're going backwards and redesigning and putting up proper stages again. In actuality, definitely it's a process because there's repetition, right? They have to find the right reps, the right training, so that's essentially what you mentioned, that's what you hone in on, that's what you specialize in.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's like and also because we know statistically founders, like, they typically are tech engineers, scientists, and a lot of creators are not sales people.
Mhm,
And so it helps because they have a blind confidence because they are the expert on it to back that up so that we actually make sure that we're hiring the correct people.
mhm,
Because so often people who are not versed in sales think, oh, well, if you've sold something, like you can just sell. And There is so much more to that.
Yeah, I did an eye
Right,
roll. I know we can't
also
see that, but I totally did an eye
yeah.
roll on that.
Yeah, and there's a sliding scale of the skill set of a salesperson.
Oh, yeah.
But if you've never hired a salesperson or you don't know you know what you're selling, but you don't know how you're selling it, it's very hard to vet. So again, we have
Mhm.
to reverse engineer the whole thing to say, we know you know this inside and out, but how can we like put this on paper and explain this and teach to this and make it scalable? And that's applicable too from the way in which they're targeting markets. It's if we want to scale this and maybe start targeting enterprise sales versus just mid market, we need to put some metrics to this. We need to put a process to this so that we see what is or is not working.
Yeah, and even on the flip side, once you do the right setup, the right training, the right implementation, the right hire, then it's okay, cool. How do you keep it accountable? Because I've seen the worst case where you have a creator, genius, founder, have a salesperson that's actually not closing, but no accountability. Once accountability is in place, they let themselves go because you can't hide from numbers. So it's
Yeah.
the whole gamut, the whole life cycle.
Yeah, and that's another offering as far as fractional sales leadership comes in, is where I've worked with businesses that they have the sales team and they do not have a sales leader. So maybe they have 2 to 5 reps, but essentially they're reporting to the CEO, but
Yeah,
not really because they don't hold any type of meetings and there isn't a one on one and there's no sales coaching or development and there's no accountability piece.
yeah,
And you really do need someone, whether it actually be an engaged founder, CEO, owner, or a fractional sales leader to say, step in on a fractional basis, whether it be 2 days a week or a certain amount of hours to conduct one on ones, to conduct pipeline management, to check in with the reps. Where do they need help? Again, from the idea of leading, being a leader of people, they need help. They need an engaged leader to say, this is what I need in order to close this. And so often, founders don't have that skill set. Being a leader of a sales team is developed. It took me years and years and
that's
it's training.
definitely
Yeah. So it's like you can't expect yourself as a founder to have that skill set and then put that on your plate as well. So again, a benefit of a fractional engagement is look, like you can build that buffer between you and the sales team and you have somebody incredibly versed in it on a fractional level. It's a win-win and the results and the numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah, 100%. And even just to the point that if correct me if I'm wrong, you're working with more technical founders, maybe technology, software, the skill set that they have are significantly different personality wise than leading or driving the personality of sales teams. So even
Mhm.
just that mix match makes it very difficult for communication, for engagement, for support, and for trust. So it's not to say that they can't be done. Of course they can be done, but it definitely requires like the 5 stages of learning where I think the
Totally.
first one is
Yeah.
I know I suck. The second one is like I'm trying. Okay, I get it. And then the final one is unconscious competence, where you're just doing it because it's been ingrained over the years. To close, I would love to know your perspective. What's the favorite thing you like about fractional? Like just for you personally when you're working?
So I have interacted with so many people in this past year, not only in doing the research to decide if I was going to launch this and now being able to engage with clients. And something that I couldn't put my finger on as I was working my way up in the corporate world is the, and it's a little hat tip to the name, is when I was thinking about the name and I came up with Rebel Scout. The idea of people that are doing things differently, they're rebels. It's not normal. It's not, it's sometimes it's instant gratification, sometimes it's thought out, sometimes it's not. It's out of the box thinkers. And I love the people that I have met. I have felt more engaged and inspired by conversations or founders or people that I'm working with, and they just have had such a cool perspective on what they're doing. And it's incredible to see people not only as founders take a risk, but people who work for these startups. Like they too are taking a risk. And it's really inspiring. And I feel very lucky to be able to do this and impact across multiple businesses. So it's so cool that it's not the same thing every day. And it's every engagement is different. And I just feel like I've lit the fire again. Like I enjoy waking up and turning on my Zoom and interacting with these people.
That's cool. The passion is back and the flame, and probably more impact that you can make
Yeah.
significant with your own. That's awesome. For our listeners out there, Hillary, what's the best place for people to go to one, thank you for being on today, and two, learn a little bit more about you?
So you can always visit the website, which is rebelscout.co. Otherwise, I'm also on LinkedIn. There's a company page of Rebel Scout Consulting, or you can find me under Hilary Swan, Hillary with one L, and Swan like the bird.
Cool. I'll put those links in the show notes, Hillary. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.